Judging from the number of books and articles already devoted to Bryan, and others probably still being written as we speak, his place in American history seems secure. One hole to be filled is an examination of Mary Baird Bryan, his wife, and her role in her husband's political career. As Bryan scholar Robert Cherney has written, quote, "No one has made an effort to examine her life at any depth or length, to study Bryan's career from her perspective, and to present her own quite impressive career in its own right," end quote. Mrs. Bryan earned a law degree and was one of the first women admitted to the bar in Nebraska, and certainly she was a tremendous help in Bryan's political career, if for no other reason than helping him answer and deal with all those letters they got. And if you've been to Fairview, which some of us here were not too long ago, the exhibit in the basement has the Bryan office, and they had a double-sided desk where they sat across from each other, and probably so they could help deal with this massive amount of correspondence. A century after his last run for the White House, Bryan has probably faded from the memories of many Americans, except for a lingering recollection, perhaps, of his participation in the 1925 Scopes evolution trial. I like to think, however, that Nebraskans will not forget him. Tangible reminders of his Lincoln years include his first home down on D Street, which is greatly altered but still standing, at least the last time I looked it was. And of course Fairview, his once rural residence, which is now surrounded by what used to be called Bryan Memorial Hospital. If you go over to the Capitol building, you'll see Bryan's bust standing in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. If you come up to the State Historical Society Library and Archives, you can find all of his books, or most of his books that he wrote over the years. His newspaper, The Commoner, which was published here in Lincoln, is on microfilm. If you went up to the museum collections upstairs here, you could find out that we have hundreds of examples of political memorabilia from the three campaigns, and some of them like these postcards, but there are badges and buttons and all kinds of stuff. I think Bryan's desk is in our collection, and just a tremendous amount of material. And I think some of you will doubtless remember the Bryan exhibit we had here at the museum in 1996, which was during the centennial of his first campaign. And along with that exhibit, we published a special issue of Nebraska History magazine that has, all of the articles relate in some way to Bryan and his career. And this issue is still available if some of you didn't get it then or would like to get it now. When you go out to the museum store, they'll have it out there. It has several really intriguing articles, and several that relate directly to this campaign. For example, one of the articles in here was written by a scholar named Julie Green that is called "The Making of Labor's Democracy, William Jennings Bryan, the American Federation of Labor and Progressive Era Politics." And it addresses this coming together of the Labor and Democratic Party in the 1908 campaign. There's also an article in one of our older magazines back in the spring 1984 issue of Nebraska History by Professor Coletta, who wrote the standard biography of Bryan, or the modern biography of Bryan. It's a 3-volume set, but his article in this particular issue addresses this business of who was the real progressive, Bryan or Theodore Roosevelt. So that might be one you'd want to take a look at. And then way back in 1956, Nebraska had an article about this 1908 campaign, which basically traced Bryan's campaign tours and all of the places he went and how many speeches he made every day. And in this particular article, apparently somebody in 1908 had sat down and tried to figure out how much Bryan had spoken and talked during the 3 campaigns. And I don't know really how good this estimate is, but that particular writer had estimated that as of 1908, if you count the other 2 campaigns, Bryan had traveled 500,000 miles, made 10,000 speeches, used 50 million words, and eaten 1,700 meals at railroad lunch counters. In addition to Bryan's enduring contributions to American political history, as the Lincoln Journal put it in 1908, quote, "He made Nebraska and its capital a household word throughout the world." And this is a postcard that's from that period that tries to do a number of things with plays on words, but certainly there's little argument that Bryan did, in fact, during his day, make Lincoln famous. So for those reasons and others I've suggested, I think it's entirely proper that Nebraskans should remember him as one of our state's foremost citizens. With that, thank you for your attention, and if you have a question or two, I'd try to answer it, or at least tell you where I think you might find the answer.
Thank you.
Can't really see, but yes.
Did they have any children?
Yes, they did. They had 3 children, and 2 of the children were still basically here at home in 1908. Grace, I believe, was the youngest. Jennings Bryan Jr. was the next, and then their older daughter got married out at Fairview, but I don't think she was living at home in 1908. And I don't know all the details of what happened to them, but I think if you go out here to the shop, our former director's wife, Barb Summer, wrote a little pamphlet. It's a walking or driving tour of Lincoln sites that are affiliated with the Bryans, and I was glancing at it before the program here, and I think it does mention more about the Bryan children. There's also plenty of other places you can find it. That reminds me of one other story that supposedly was told by the oldest daughter, Ruth, who supposedly was out at Fairview for some reason, and she was coming into Lincoln. And in those days, of course, the Fairview was in the country, and there was a streetcar line that came pretty close, so she was going to take the streetcar into Lincoln, and she got close enough, she just saw the streetcar starting to pull away, and so she took off running and finally just grabbed onto it and swung herself aboard and sat down and mentioned to the person she sat by that she thought she was probably the only Bryan who had run for anything and caught it. I don't know if that's a true story, but it's a good one. If nothing else, thank you for your attention, and as I say, maybe stop by the museum store and take a look at the Bryan things we have, and maybe you'll find something you want to pick up and take home to read. Thanks again.